Baaa by David Macaulay. Baaa. Baaa by David Macaulay. Perhaps a cautionary tale? There is no record of when the last person disappeared. The only person who could have recorded when the last person disappeared was the last person to disappear. But no matter who left last, the place was deserted. One day, a flock of sheep in a remote pasture ran out of food. Their search for nourishment took them to an abandoned town where they ate the lawns, flower beds, and potted plants. Tired of traveling yet still hungry, they wandered into a house where a refrigerator hummed. Its food was cold and hard, but the sheep found it quite tasty. For the next few days, the sheep did nothing but eat, drink, and sleep. When they ran out of food in one house, they shuffled into another. After eating, drinking, and sleeping their way through 17 houses, they stumbled into a supermarket. They couldn't believe their eyes. It was filled with food. It was also filled with terrible music, so the sheep took their favorite items back to their houses. One day, while gambling across a family room, a young lad accidentally turned on a television. When it began to glow, everyone stared and stared. After 3 days, some of the sheep became bored. They went outside and frolicked in the fresh air, but that became boring too. So they went back inside to watch more glow. Then machines were discovered that made pictures and sounds inside televisions. By watching movies over and over again, the sheep learned to speak and eventually to read. The more they learned about people, the more they wanted to be like them. They started wearing clothes and discovered that many are made of wool. So that's where it went. Schools were established, thoughts were had. Careers were pursued, bank accounts opened. Television stations went back on the air. Some sheep became quite famous, even weather sheep. It was a time of great prosperity. Everything was plentiful. Gas was cheap. The population grew. Soon sheep were traveling. Some went on business trips. Others sought their roots. Mom, what's wrong with Dad? Hush, dear. Around this time, leaders arose from the sheep population. Some had charisma, others connections. At breakfast time, leaders and other interesting sheep appeared on television and discussed timely topics. the population continued to grow. Sheep drove everywhere and usually at the same time. As the good life continued, it naturally became a little more complicated. Lines at the market and gas stations were growing longer and moving more slowly. Popular items were often gone from the shelves by 10 o'clock in the morning. And for the first time since they left the pasture, some sheep were going to bed hungry. One evening, between commercials, a news sheep announced that things were being used up too fast, but nobody paid much attention. However, when even the leaders couldn't get everything they wanted, rationing was imposed. After this, there was almost enough to go around. Then things got worse, so laws were passed. And still, some neighborhoods always seem to have more of everything. Hungry sheep turned to crime. As more and more goods went to fewer and fewer sheep, the number of unhappy sheep grew. Riots broke out and injuries were sustained. More comedies were shown on television. Leaders presented charts and graphs that proved there was no hunger. Everything is just fine. See the chart. But not everyone heard the good news. Desperate and angry, a number of sheep marched into town to see their leaders. Unfortunately, the leaders were tied up in meetings and could not be disturbed. Tempers flared, terrible words were shouted. Things were thrown, troopers arrived to keep the peace. The following day, an end to the food shortage was announced. A new product called Baaa had been invented. It would be cheap, plentiful, and nutritious. Baaa! Try it. Have a friend over for dinner. Everyone tried it and everyone liked it. Peace returned, but then everyone liked it too much and soon Baaa was all gone. Again, sheep were hungry. Again, they threw things. Once more, troops restored the peace, and shortly thereafter, Baaa shops reopened with fresh supplies. For months, this process repeated itself. While the population steadily declined, the demand for Baaa grew. The trouble persisted, and peace had to be restored a few more times. By the time the throwing had stopped completely, Baaa was enormously popular. Baaa vans were familiar to everyone. They passed through some neighborhoods several times a day. Oh, look, free rides. Once again, life was comfortable. There wasn't a single unhappy sheep to be found anywhere. Please pass the mint sauce. As the population grew smaller, fewer leaders were required. Each evening, more and more houses were vacant, more televisions cold. Entire neighborhoods became completely abandoned. The silence spread, pools went unfiltered. With hardly anyone left to lead, the remaining leaders were unnecessary. They too disappeared. Eventually, there were only 2 sheep left. And one day, they met for lunch. There is no record of when the last one disappeared. Much later, a fish cautiously swam toward the beach and stared at the land for a long time and then turned and swam in the opposite direction. The next day it came back and this time swam a little closer to the beach before turning around. It came back again several times that week. On the 8th day it swam almost to the very edge of the water, intending to crawl onto the dry land. But at the last moment it turned again and disappeared into the depths of the ocean. The end. Now, I don't know if you're familiar with Thomas Robert Malthus. He was an economist, but he was tremendously influential on the understanding of the ecology, big influence on Darwin as well. And he basically said that anytime there was an innovation which allowed, people to eat more and live better, well, then the problem was, okay, now people are eating better and they're living better, and what do they always do? They have more babies. The population grows to fill the food supply and people start starving again. And this has been true for most of history. Now, with the invention of birth control, all of a sudden we have a situation where the population doesn't necessarily automatically expand to eat all the food available, but then we've basically created another Malthusian problem. We don't eat every resource available, but what we end up doing is we end up consuming all the available resources in other ways. We buy more stuff, we use more resources, and then again, people start going hungry. Except for not because the population is too huge, but simply because we consume too many things. And then the question is, how long can we do it? How long can we simply consume everything we can before the earth basically creates a situation where we can't keep consuming anymore? Well, who knows? Some of you may have noticed a parallel with the movie Soylent Green. If you don't know about Soylent Green, watch the movie. But anyway, I hope we can learn the lessons of history and ecology and movies. Because, well, I'd like to hope we can learn. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. And, well, have a nice day. And don't consume too much. There's lots of things that are fun in life that don't involve a bigger car, a bigger house, and stuffing yourself with more fat and cholesterol. So, have a nice day. Bye-bye.